Okay. Hey, Dr. Roos here. Making another concept video. I've made a concept video for cell respiration, which is sort of like the opposite of photosynthesis. So watch that if you like. And this one, I want to just kind of briefly go through the highlights of the photosynthesis, right? It's something that, many organisms are capable of. Plants, there's phytoplankton in the ocean that can use it, right? It's basically with photosynthesis, you require a photon of light or a light source. That's their source of energy. And that allows we call it the Calvin cycle too, right? The dark reaction or Calvin cycle. All right, they're synonymous. In our textbook, they stopped using the phrase dark reaction. I think it's referred to as light independent reactions. But you have the light reactions in photosynthesis that produce ATP, NADPH, and these are required for the dark reaction or the Calvin cycle, where we can fix CO2 and produce carbohydrate, right? So the overall photosynthesis reaction is plants can use carbon dioxide, they require water, and they fix it, which means it's no longer a gas, right? When you turn it into what we call a 3-carbon carbohydrate, you're sticking the carbon from CO2 onto some more carbons. When you do that, it's no longer in a gas state. Okay, so that's the idea of carbon fixation. So in photosynthesis, there's two big concepts that, right? Your energy source in photosynthesis is a photon or light. And then in organisms that use photosynthesis, then when they fix CO2 is their carbon source, right? So the carbon source can, be used to make carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins, right? The carbon from CO2, is used for all the carbon that you need to make the carbohydrates and all the carbon you need to make the lipids, right? They are, we refer to them as hydrocarbons, right? Because we are a carbon-based life form, all life on this, right? It's the carbon skeleton is another way of thinking of it. And then you can add things to the carbon skeleton to make different molecules that you end up making these macromolecules from. So the light reaction is dependent on photons as well as, you need the water molecule during the light reactions to act as the ultimate source of electrons, right? Because in order to fix the CO2 in the Calvin cycle, there needs to be an electron source. So the photon of energy is converted to ATP that's needed for that process. The electrons that come from water are fed to NADP, and that turns it into NADPH, right? So NADP is in photosynthesis, right? It lacks 2 electrons. When it becomes NADPH, 2 electrons are added to this molecule, and then you get NADPH. Okay? The electrons that you feed NADP comes from water. Okay? Then these electrons, 2 electrons that NADP has, are given during the Calvin cycle, right? They're donated. Then NADP, when it dumps the electrons off at the Calvin cycle, it's going to go back to being NADP. Right? The H indicates it has the electrons. But you need electrons in order to make this what are called the 3-carbon carbohydrate. All right, that's the product of the Calvin cycle or the dark reaction. Okay, but just to reemphasize this again, that 3-carbon carbohydrate, there are, say, many enzymes needed, and they can convert these molecules in the Calvin cycle into carbohydrates that the plant needs, or the organism, the lipids, and the proteins, right? So the carbon source. They're going to need other things besides carbon, but we always, you know, we group organisms based on their carbon and energy sources. That's just sort of a catchphrase in biology. Okay, so this was just to reiterate, this is the overall photosynthesis reaction. The CO2 is converted to a 3-carbon carbohydrate. CHO is an acronym for carbohydrate. It produces oxygen because when you split water, this oxygen becomes oxygen gas, and you get electrons fed to NADP, right? In cell respiration, we didn't use NADP, right? We used NAD, and NAD became NADH2, NADH. But that's for cell respiration. But the reason I bring that up, you gotta, right, remember what's involved in cell respiration. And when we're talking about photosynthesis, the P, let's just think of the P, photosynthesis. NADP is what's used during this process. Okay, so that's it.